Welcome, everyone. It is still January, so I can still say Happy New Year. I hope that you kicked off 2022 in good spirits, and I really appreciate you joining us here today. I know that COVID-19 and all its variants continue to just wreak havoc on our world, particularly on the legalities of work. We have seen numerous employment laws and HR policies hit the streets last year in response to the pandemic, and more are still to come down the pike. And it's like trying to comply with all this is becoming confusing and quite distressing. And that's why we're here today. My goal is that we all walk away a bit more in the know about employer and employee rights, as well as benefits. And hopefully that helps us to see how we can make better decisions for ourselves, our team going forward. Right. Now, as an introduction, this program is sponsored by Careers Advance, a private practice specializing in professional training and development. My name is Lisa Panarello, and I am the head of Careers Advance, and I'm going to be your host. Our program is being recorded, and it's going to be sent to all of you as a resource to review at your leisure and also share with your colleagues and friends. And for that reason, we're just going to have everyone be kept on mute. You have your cameras on. We're just going to keep you on mute to maintain that audio quality. However, you are absolutely encouraged to participate via the chat box. So as questions or ideas and thoughts come to your mind, just drop them there and we will address as many as possible during the panel discussion and the Q&A portion at the end. Right. And just clear here, speaking of discussion, I want to stipulate that what you hear today does not constitute legal or HR advice. It is for information purposes only. Now, I'm confident we're going to hear very beneficial information. So let's meet our three special guests, starting with Mike Morea. After a stellar 20-year career at large law firms specializing in representing Fortune 500 firms, Mike founded a private practice in 2017 to provide employment law counseling to owners of small and medium-sized businesses. He received his Juris Doctorate from Pace University, Elizabeth Hobbs School of Law, and a BA degree in philosophy from Villanova University. He's a member of the New Jersey and New York State bars and former co-chair of the Bergen County Bar Association Labor and Employment Law Committee. And for the past 3 years, Mike has been named among the elite Thomson Reuters list of super lawyers for New Jersey and New York metro area. Next, we've got Russell Berger. Russell is the principal of Offit Kerman, a labor and employment practice group. For more than 10 years with the firm, he's been serving as a member of management and outside general counsel, helping businesses to navigate opportunities and challenges, both seen and unseen. He is well-versed in diverse employment matters, and with respect to all aspects of employee relations, he litigates in state and federal courts. Russell earned his JD from the University of Maryland and a BA degree in political science from John Hopkins University. And he's earned the distinction of Super Lawyer's Rising Star every year to date since 2012. Last but not least, from the other side of our employment table, we have Carla Noboa. Carla is a highly regarded HR generalist with Altec Services, a premier leader in staffing for the transportation industry. And she previously worked with FedEx and Talent Hub 360. While pursuing her dual master's and bachelor's degree in human resources from Thomas and Edison University, Carla has been serving as a passionate and straightforward voice for job seekers and employees. Her experience spans the areas of recruitment, employee engagement, onboarding, compensation, and performance management. She's an active member of SHRM, the Society of Human Resource Management, and is on the board of the Staffing Management Association of New Jersey. Now we know who we've got with us, so let's dive in. I've got 4 key questions that I want to ask, but remember to drop your questions in the chat and we'll get to them, all right? First question up. On everyone's mind, can I be forced to get the COVID-19 vaccination in order to work? You know, I've been reading breaking news on this matter for several weeks now. OSHA had set an emergency temporary standard requiring businesses with at least 100 employees to ensure workers are vaccinated against COVID by February 9th or undergo weekly testing. Last week, I just read that the US Supreme Court blocked this rule. Day after that, I read another article revealing that Citigroup is requiring all of its 200,000 employees be vaccinated. And those who don't comply will be fired unless they receive an exemption. So Michael, I'm going to come to you first. Where do we stand here? Can employees be forced to get the COVID vaccination and or weekly testing in order to work? And are there different rules per se for certain industries or the public and private sector?
All right, thank you, Lisa. Yeah, absolutely. Employers can require their employees to get vaccinated. Yeah, they have that right. They'll have to make accommodations for religious reasons, disabilities, sincerely held religious beliefs, which Russell, I believe, is going to answer a question on that. So I'm not going to get into that. Now, whether some industries you have to require your employees to get vaccinated, and some jurisdictions you have to. For example, the OSHA rule, which you just mentioned, was overturned, but the same day, the Supreme Court upheld a rule from the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services, which requires most healthcare facilities that receive Medicare, Medicaid reimbursement to require their employees to be vaccinated. New York City requires all workers who work in an office with somebody else or public facing to be vaccinated. New Jersey just went a step further than the CMS rule and is requiring all healthcare facilities to have all their employees vaccinated and boosted. That's the first one I've known where they're requiring booster shots also. So it really does. Now, the businesses that don't require it, it's their choice whether they want to. But any businesses that's requiring vaccination records, you got to keep in mind, these are, people talk pretty freely about it, but they are protected. That's protected health information. Their vaccine records are protected by HIPAA. You have to treat them as protected health information. You have to keep it separate than the employee's files. I get it commonly, small businesses, 5 people, everybody knows who's vaccinated or not, but the owner of the business cannot be saying who's vaccinated or not because they're disclosing private protected health information. So it seems a little silly sometimes since everybody knows in a smaller business, but you need to be careful. Businesses, Lisa?
When you say required, that they are required, then if they don't, then it's okay that they let that person go. They can terminate their employment?
They could, subject to the accommodations issues, which Russell will get into. Yeah. But yeah, you can fire employees if they don't want to get vaccinated. Larger businesses have gone the vaccine route. Other businesses haven't. Some businesses.
So it's not a federal mandate that all businesses required. It's those that are over the 100 employees. Is that?
No, that got stayed. I understand OSHA's trying to implement that instead of an emergency temporary standard as a rule. I think they're going to come into a lot of the same problems that they ran into before the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court ruled that OSHA didn't have the authority to create a vaccine. Not that OSHA didn't only have emergency powers to do it. The rulings were pretty broader on that. But some businesses have gone middle ground. We want you to get vaccinated. So if you don't, you got to go get that cotton, the Q-tip up your nose every week. So if you want to avoid that, get vaccinated, which is sort of a middle ground approach, which, to me personally, I think it's more attractive for businesses because you're not mandating, you're not telling your employees what to do, but you're certainly incentivizing them. Any business that goes that route, you got to be aware, though, that non-exempt employees, in other words, employees who are eligible for overtime, are likely entitled. That's probably going to count as compensable time, hours worked, when they're going to get testing, if that's a work requirement, and they'll have to be paid for it. So just something to think about it for the business that do go that middle route. It may, depending on their workforce, may create other issues for them.
Right. Yeah, I read that the employers that are saying you have to go get tested, that they do have to pay for that time, that it's on work time.
I had one client that did it, but they required that you got tested at the CVS, which was like across the street from them. So it didn't really, it wasn't going to take long. They weren't going to be paying employees an hour and a half to go get tested. So, you just got to be a little creative and flexible in how you're approaching it.
Great. Well, as you intimated, Russell's going to kind of handle this part of it, the other side of the question, if you will. Russell, take us a bit further. What are the rules for employees who claim religious and medical exemptions? Like, what proof is required? And do companies have to allow employees to work from home, or can they terminate?
Yeah. So to start with, if you're an employer that elects to have a mandatory vaccination policy, or you fall into an industry or you're in a location where you have to have a mandatory vaccination policy, there's got to be carve-outs. And those carve-outs, as Mike alluded to, are for sincerely held religious beliefs and for disabilities. With respect to disability, frankly, I've seen less of that, less questions around that. And I think it's because most employers that are dealing with those issues have dealt with ADA disability accommodation issues before. They already have a form for that. They already have a process for that. And there's at least some familiarity with, making an accommodation for an employee because of a disability. So no, and I would add, I probably see less of that because there's not a lot of medical disabilities that would necessitate exclusion from getting a vaccine. I mean, they do exist. They are out there. There are contraindications to the vaccines, but there's not very many of them. It's not a very prevalent issue. So we haven't seen a ton of that. But when we do, it's go through the ADA process. If an employee raises the issue, you get the doctor's note, you go through, you get that health information. As Mike said, you keep that entirely separately and wall that off and keep it under lock and key. But you go through it, and if a doctor says this person has a disability and can't get a vaccine, then you have the right to challenge that just as you would any other disability and accommodation request under the ADA. But by and large, that's probably the end of the conversation. The first part of the conversation, which is, do they have to be vaccinated or not? And I'll address the religious belief component before I get to the second half, which is, what do you do? What does this mean? But with respect to sincerely held religious beliefs, that's something that I've found that employers who have implemented vaccine policies have struggled with a little bit more, because frankly, we don't see a ton of religious accommodation requests. It's not nearly as prevalent, so employers aren't as used to dealing with it as they are disability accommodation requests. And it's a lot, whereas disability is something that, a doctor can look at and write a note on. Sincerely held religious beliefs are a far more amorphous thing and harder to nail down. What is someone's sincerely held religious belief, and when did they adopt it, and what does it mean, and how does it prevent them from getting a vaccine? So, I've had clients that feel like, that have exercised discretion in how they handle those requests, and some want to be firmer about it, and some are looser about it. But ultimately, what you do, it's not totally dissimilar to the disability accommodation process. You go through it where you ask what is the religious belief, and how does this religious belief preclude you from getting vaccinated? And you ask those questions, and you just try to drill down on those answers with follow-up if need be. And this is something that I would certainly recommend any employer that implements a vaccine policy along these lines ought to have these forms attached to the policy and ought to make it easy. And this should not be something that an HR person is just trying to guess at when the issue arises. This should be something with a form and template, and please fill out this form. And then the hard part for the employer is evaluating it. Is this a sincerely held belief? And then once you get past either of those tasks and you determine, okay, this is someone who needs an accommodation, now you've got to figure out what that accommodation is going to be. And that is a very fact-specific process, because it depends on what the job is, what the company is, what are the risks. Are you client-facing? Are you around people all the time? Or are you sitting in a back office and you can sit in the office with your door shut all day? So what do those types of accommodations look like? And I will say, just as a frame of reference, what I've seen a fair amount in office place settings has been test on a regular basis, and where even if the locality doesn't mandate a mask, or the office doesn't already mandate masks, you're going to have to wear a mask when you walk through the office as a way of keeping things safe. Of course, as Mike mentioned, as an employer, you're not allowed to talk about anybody's health issues. So you can have somebody walking through the office clearly wearing a mask when no one else is because of this accommodation, and you're just not going to say anything about it. And so it's kind of odd. And we've certainly seen the same thing with people, somebody in our office has tested positive and they're and we're giving you notice, and there's 6 people that work in the office and somebody doesn't show up for the next 2 weeks. People can put that together and figure it out. That so be it. Just, you as the employer can't disclose that information.
Well, speaking of that, kind of rolls right into my second question here, which is about privacy and how far can employers go in collecting and monitoring data? I know it's, the government has generally a lot of room to maneuver when processing personal data for public interest. Russell, I'm just going back to you on this. What health information can private companies request from employees to certify that they're fit to work? And what's considered an overreach? This way, our employees and kind of people on the call here know what they should be allowed to give and not give.
Yeah. So from with respect to COVID, certainly test results are permissible asks, and vaccination status are permissible asks. So I've seen a number of employers that have asked for people to upload proof of vaccination. And when I'm giving that advice to an employer, I'm going to say, just ask for the vaccination card. You don't want to know anything beyond that, and because you don't want to fall into getting other information. You just want to know that they're vaccinated, or if it's a test result, just want to know whether you've tested positive. We don't want to get into any other information beyond that, because once you do, you could be triggering a health exam under the ADA, and then there's more obligations that come into place for an employer. So by and large, the simple answer, an employer can ask, are you vaccinated? And an employee has to answer that question, or be at jeopardy for whatever actions the employer wants to take. And the employer can require testing or a symptom check, on the way into the workplace. Because before testing was as prevalent as it is now, it was symptom check. Take your temperature on the way into the workplace. So those things are all permissible, but an employer has to be really careful about how they store that data to the extent they collect it. And what I say to employers is, you can ask your employees if they're vaccinated, but then you shouldn't ask them why. When they say yes, when they say no, that's the end of the conversation. It's, are you vaccinated, yes or no? And then if the answer is no, and there's a vaccine policy in place, then it's, well, you're going to have to apply for an exemption in order to continue to come into our workplace. Here are the forms, and then let the employee fill out the forms in that process.
Can they ask, because you mentioned the body history and, the body temperature and those kind of symptom questions. Can they ask you about your travel history, where you've been lately? Is that over the reach, or?
No, I mean, that's not health information. So that's certainly something an employer can ask, and it probably has a little bit more freedom to ask. I think, my personal perspective in terms of advising clients on this is a global pandemic. So while there may be hotspots in some places, where someone went is probably not all that relevant today. And you'd have to update that constantly, right? You can see the CDC charts where cases are spiking, and that changes weekly. So I don't find that to be a particularly helpful question. You can ask it. I just don't see it being all that telling.
Well, it's good to know. It can be asked, but it's not considered an overreach because it's not a health question. It's almost like, hey, when you came in the next day, hey, how'd you have a good weekend? Almost, it seems kind of general.
Yeah, right. And Carla may touch on this, but when employers implement these policies, even if they say we have to do it, we got to keep people safe, the law says we have to do it, so we got to do it. There's still a very much a management, employee engagement aspect to this that should be considered from the employer perspective as well.
Right. And before I come to you, I have a question for you, Carla. We had a question in the chat. If someone tests positive in the office, does that have to be disclosed to everyone? And I think you were both saying that the answer to that is no, right?
What
that it shouldn't?
you certainly
How do
can't
you disclose?
say, right, like if I tested positive, you can't send an email out and say Russell tested positive. That's unquestionably going to violate the ADA and the confidentiality requirements around medical information for employees. What I generally recommend, and this may be subject to different rules in different jurisdictions, but a general recommendation is send out an email and put people on notice. And somebody in our office has tested positive. I imagine everyone on this has probably already gotten this email from someplace they've been, the kid's school, wherever, that says someone has tested positive. Close contacts have already been, identified and notified and put into the close contact protocol. We're providing this general notice. We're doing cleaning. Here's a reminder to, monitor your symptoms and don't come into work if you're sick. And, that kind of template-y type notice that you get from employers, schools, summer camps, wherever you go these days.
Smart way to just put, like you said, putting everyone notice, and here's what you need to do to keep yourself safe without outing the person. And if the individuals want to go find out who, well, that's on them, and you don't have to really take on that heat as an employer, right?
Right. Yeah. We shouldn't be getting into the individual level.
Right.
As an employer.
So Carla, from the HR perspective, recruiting perspective, how are the results of this health data? In other words, finding out that someone has COVID or doesn't want to get the vaccination, is getting a vaccination, whatever the decisions are, how is this health data impacting hiring decisions, like whether the company is going to recruit or not recruit that individual?
So when it comes to bouncing back off Russell with the whole thing in the office, like we did have someone test positive in our office, and when there was an email sent out to everyone, just like, hey, someone tested positive. If you were near that person, please get tested. We advise you to let us know if you tested positive or negative, just to keep everyone in line and make sure no one gets sick in the office. And like Russell said, if we actually did quarantine our whole office. Like once we found out one person was tested positive, we just quarantined the whole office for 2 weeks just to be safe. And we had a cleaning service come into the office and take care of that. And we also tested again, all of us, before coming back, just to make things easier and just be more safe. And if anyone feels any type of sickness, I recommend just stay home. If employers know what's going on, they understand the situation. So it's better to be safe than sorry. I always encourage my employees, if you feel sick, even if it's a little cold, just stay home. Just let me know in a couple of days how you feel. I work in the transportation industry, so it is mandated in the transportation industry that all the technicians, I hire technicians who work on commuter trains, have to get vaccinated. If the technicians refuse to get vaccinated, they're either terminated or shut down from the site until they are vaccinated. So let's say like I was a technician working in California. In California, you have to be mandated to get the vaccine. But let's say for my personal reasons, I didn't want to get the vaccination. I cannot be allowed on the site. I'm not terminated as of yet, but I do have a window of when I have to get vaccinated to be allowed back onto the site. For New York, the same thing, like Mike and Russell were touching, they do have to get vaccinated, but they do have the option to get weekly tested. As far as New Jersey, the sites that I deal with, they're not mandated as of yet, but it is advised if they can do it, just to make everything easier for everyone. When it comes to recruiting, it's definitely a challenge because everyone has their own input on vaccination. I have dealt with a lot of handfuls of arguments of being told when it comes to sourcing and recruiting. So I just think it's a personal choice. I agree with everyone saying you can't force anyone to do anything. So it's a matter of how do you want to go into your career next? Like, are you okay with being vaccinated for the reasons why you have to be vaccinated, or did you want to drift away from something else? Like I always tell people, it's not my choice. It's not my personal choice. It's just mandated, and I have to follow that. Whatever the president says, I have to follow it. But we can work around it in a sense of like, we can make accommodations if you don't feel the reason why you should get it or not. And
so are you seeing some employers making those accommodations when they're recruiting and they're saying they don't want to be vaccinated? Do you feel that, are you seeing more where companies are saying, well, we want you to be vaccinated, it's mandatory, and we need you to be vaccinated, so we're not bringing you on board? Or instead, if they really like that candidate, they look to see doing remote work and other accommodations for that? What are you seeing them leaning towards?
So since I work in mostly blue collar, my techs have to be on board. So in this case, I do have some managers where they're just okay with having the technician working on one site alone instead of being surrounded by other people. So that's an accommodation. Or we have the first part that you mentioned where they have to be vaccinated or else they're shut down or they can't come on board just because that's what the state is mandating. So we do have to follow that. Like in the blue collar industry, especially in transportation, there's no gray area. It's either you have it or you don't. And for the most part, the blue collar workers do understand the situation. So they'll tell you, they have told me like, you know, Carla, I don't feel comfortable getting vaccinated. And I know it's not you, I know it's the mandate. So I unfortunately had to pass on this opportunity.
Yeah, that's interesting. It comes down to then you making your personal decision with that to determine where you want to go next in your career. That's interesting. Yeah.
I always tell them it's not my choice. I support whatever you do, and I understand.
Right.
It's not an easy thing I just, the whole situation is very sticky, so I understand.
Yeah. See how this sort of plays out. Well, let's switch gears now towards, dare I say, assistance. What can be helpful for folks out there? What's available right now? I heard that federal extended unemployment benefits expired in September 2021, so it's no longer available. So, Mike, if someone is a full-time or part-time W-2 employee and they're unable to work due to COVID, since they don't have extended unemployment benefits anymore, what other insurance program can they possibly qualify for, and how do they go about it?
Let me just preface this. I represent employers, so I don't get involved in the nitty gritty of employees applying for benefits or how the DOLs handle them. But basically, it's state programs now. So for example, during the pandemic, New Jersey amended its temporary disability benefits law to provide that someone who's sick with COVID is eligible for temporary disability benefits. They also amended the New Jersey Family Leave Insurance, and both those, TBD and Family Leave Insurance, those both come out of the paychecks. I mean, every person who runs through a payroll in New Jersey is paying into those programs. You normally see it more when somebody's injured or the family leave, newborn bonding and stuff, but those both apply to COVID issues. Now, if you need to take care of somebody, you're eligible for benefits for that. In fact, I just had a client who, one of their employees started the year, has been sick with COVID. She used up all her paid sick leave. They call her, what are you doing? Like, well, you can tell her she's used up all her benefits, but she's potentially eligible for TBD and family leave, and give her the link to go apply. One thing I always caution employers is don't tell employees whether they're eligible or not, and don't start giving them legal advice, but give them enough information where they can start the process, and the employer will have to respond, for wage verification and stuff like that. If you contract COVID at work, you may be eligible for workers' compensation benefits. But I think that's hard. I think it's really hard to prove you caught COVID at work, because it's everywhere.
So that's the validation point for workers' comp. It has to be an injury or
it has to be a workplace injury.
Job.
Workers' comp compensates you if you become injured or ill at work, through work. It's tough. I mean, I think that's going to be tough, and maybe someone who handles workers' comp, another attorney might be able to, give a better sense of it. But I mean,
otherwise you have to do your own
staying home
tracing
and they're
say, I
getting
got
sick,
it from this person, right?
Yeah, right. I got it at work. Well, I mean, everywhere you go, you're potentially exposed, unfortunately. But yeah. So it's really the state programs. But your first one's going to be your paid sick leave. And I think there's a question on that later, but New York, New Jersey, New York City, all have mandatory paid sick leave laws. Employers have to provide paid sick leave. So, that's the first where you keep getting pay. And then it could be something like temporary disability or family leave or workers' comp. I think, could be wrong, I'm not positive, but I think in New York, you may be eligible for unemployment benefits if you're sick, state unemployment benefits if you're out sick with COVID. So
it's state by state then. So we would advise everyone to go to their state site.
I mean, there might be something at the federal level for federal employees, but I don't get involved in that stuff. But yeah, the federal unemployment benefit expired. The like you said, so it's state benefits at this point.
Right. Well, Russell, we were just talking with Mike about W-2 employees. What about if you're self-employed, maybe you're an independent contractor, or that new term today, gig worker, you're sort of an online platform worker, and you're affected by COVID? Are there different or other assurance programs that can help them out?
It's kind of the same boat. I mean, what the unique thing that happened at the beginning of the pandemic was, the unemployment relief said, don't worry about it. You're an independent contract, assuming you actually are an independent contractor. It's a whole nother question and webinar topic for down the road. But assuming you're actually an independent contractor, don't sweat it. Apply for unemployment. This is a national crisis. We'll shoehorn you into this program that isn't really designed for you because, we get it. No one can work, and if you're a gig worker, if you're a contractor, we've got to find some way to keep you afloat. And so yeah, just apply for unemployment. We'll do everything through unemployment. And now, as that's as we were discussing, is wrapped up, we're kind of back to the same type of options that there were before, plus some local programs, state or local. And I know, I'm down here in Maryland, and I know here we have a big budget surplus in our state government. So they're looking, they're creating programs and they're looking to get that money out. So there's all sorts of different creative programs that still exist and that were created at the beginning of the pandemic for people at different levels of the economy. And the W-2 worker is more straightforward. But there are all sorts of grants and loans and different programs that exist. Like in Maryland, it's not the Department of Labor, it's the State Department of Commerce where some of these programs reside. So it depends on an individual's specific circumstance, but the best advice I have is go explore all those programs. Go hunting around, at your state and local government websites. Because the county I live in has had a restaurant revitalization fund, which I know is not exactly your question, but that's at the county level. So there's programming all up and down, state and local government that could be of assistance. And at least I don't know where all the audience members are, but kind of on this East Coast, Northeast, Mid-Atlantic footprint, the governments are pretty progressive in terms of trying to get those benefits out to people. So it's certainly, advantageous in that respect.
That's very interesting. So I kind of combining both of what you said, beyond government, federal, state, city, county, like go digging for the local support. And you gave even some creative ideas to becoming progressive grants. You may even have private organizations that looking to help out folks. So, and then the loans, which is probably a last option, but I never thought of grants.
I was going to add too, even, and this is probably more on the contractor, small business owner. I'm out there on my own side than like the true gig worker. But the SBA and, local chambers of commerce, they may have programs and options available to you as well.
Great. Well, I want to remind everyone, because I'm going to answer, a few questions here. We got a couple I'm going to throw in. If you have one specific to your situation, you can directly totally to me if you like, because I've got a couple more questions we want to hear from you as well. Want to stay in the same realm as assistance, but from sort of a different angle. So this is my final question. I call it from a personal perspective. What are employees, doing to support employee health? I've heard a lot, read a lot that the pandemic has increased the trend of employers playing an expanded role in what they're calling the social safety net. So Carla, from what you're seeing, what measures are being provided in terms of wellness benefits? What can employees and even job seekers look out for or ask for beyond this financial assistance that we're talking about from their wellness perspective? Because we're hearing all kinds of, mental situations, physical situations, everything has come about from this. What wellness benefits are you seeing that employees and job seekers can look out for?
I definitely would recommend looking at the benefits package and definitely asking if your HR generalist or specialist or recruiter if they offer mental health programs, because that's been a top of the question for me, because we do offer mental health programs for our employees, especially during the pandemic. We had a couple already use the program just because of everything that's happening. I definitely asked them if they have flexibility, because again, especially with childcare, kids going to school getting COVID or vice versa, parents or anyone is looking for that flexibility of, hey, if something were to happen, can I work from home to take care of what I need to take care of? So I think that's super important. It's okay for you to ask that also, especially for me as an HR. Like I want to hear that you say that, because I want you to feel comfortable enough to say, hey, Carla, like I understand the situation's going on, but this is what I need from you in order to work with you. Can you guys provide that, or can you meet me halfway? So I definitely encourage you guys to definitely ask that whoever you're replying for. I definitely, no matter what, I will always tell you like, hey, this is what we can do halfway. This is what we can meet you. Please let me know ahead of time how I can accommodate it, or how else I could help you.
What are some of those? I know it's a touchy subject for folks to say mental health, but it covers such a wide range of people in what's on in our lives. What does that look like? What can a mental health benefit look like? What's an example that an employer might provide?
In our case, we had a situation where a technician did have a breakdown at work. We just basically told him, we read him his benefits package, because he wasn't aware. Again, we always have to educate our employees, so I had to re-educate him again on his benefits package. And I just basically let him know, like, here are your options of what to do when you feel this way. You can call me, call your supervisor, call your manager, call whoever you have in your phone first. So it doesn't get to the point where you feel like you're alone, because it's very easy to feel alone. And I want to remind people, like, hey, we're all going through something no matter what. And it's easy to call someone that you trust first, even if it's your employer. Just be like, hey, I need to talk to someone, what's going on. So we definitely covered that. And we definitely covered the therapy, covered activities like the gym, helping out, covered like reading something like every day, or even just checking in with me, letting me know how they feel every day. That was one of the situations that we had. Like he just felt alone, so he just would call me every day, like, hey, Carla, this is how I feel today. I'm good today. Yesterday I had a situation, but it's okay. And I encouraged him to basically tell me what he did that day. So like what I would tell him, like he would tell me, like, okay, I went to work. This is what happened at work. I covered A through Z. I felt better doing this instead of that, because yesterday when I did that, it triggered this emotion. So this is what I'm doing. So we did that like on a 30-day course. Then after that, we'll let him go and check in every couple of weeks to make sure he was okay. Because you always have to build that trust. And I like to build that trust with my employees and make sure, let them know, like, hey, I'm here for you. Like it's beneficial on the both ends, just because, of course, I don't want my employee to get sick or terminated or anything of that nature just because of situation that he had no idea how to handle, or she had no idea how to handle.
So beyond a benefit part of the package,
Yeah.
it's what you're suggesting is having that human connection with your manager. So you could even ask that when you're having those interviews with prospective employers, and how do you have this open communication, and how do you handle mental health issues, and what kind of support do you provide, right? Because I've been hearing a little bit about, because everything is technology, like telehealth. Do you
Yes.
offer, does your benefits package cover telehealth visits or yoga? And even you mentioned the gym and providing reading material. So I would definitely suggest asking the question and being open about it.
We definitely had we definitely have the telehealth. We definitely have that the option for the employees to take. It's up to them if they want to take it, but we do encourage it, because again, no one wants to go into the office, no one wants to go into the facility just because of COVID. So we definitely encourage that.
Yeah. Great. Well, Michael, some of the things that Carl is mentioning, I mean, even outside of what you may know of sort of wellness benefits, whether it be telehealth, whether it be providing a gym membership or yoga membership, what have you, are there any federal or state mandates for companies to offer such wellness benefits? Because this is kind of new in the recent 10 years, or is this just more company to company?
I believe early on in the pandemic, one of the first federal required insurance companies to cover telehealth. But that's not an employee, an employer-employee benefit per se, although the insurance covers it and you provide health insurance to your employees, the employees get the benefit of it. Really for employees, it's really just, paid sick leave. New York, New Jersey, New York City, as I mentioned, they all have various paid sick leave laws where you get up to 40 hours or up to 56 hours of paid sick leave a year. I mean, there are other protections such as the Family Medical Leave Act, New Jersey Family Leave Act. They give you job protection if you're out sick for an extended period of time or having to take care of somebody who's out sick, but those are usually unpaid. But like, for example, in New Jersey, that ties in New Jersey, which is my practice mainly is, employers of 30 or more have to provide New Jersey family leave. So that's up to 16 weeks off to care for somebody else. It does not provide care for your own health issues. But that ties in with New Jersey family leave insurance benefits. You don't get 16 weeks of it, but you can get the benefits, so you get some of your income back during it. But yeah, no, there's nothing that's requiring the employers to provide it, unless it's through what insurance is required to provide.
So since it's not a requirement, it sounds like it would become more of a enticement for their own recruiting efforts, sort of, advancing your employer's marketability. If you're trying to attract the talent, and we all hear about how difficult it is to get talent these days, there might be something to them to be creative in order to say, hey, this is another benefit you come if you work with us. Right?
Or even just highlight during the interviews that the insurance, because usually it's coming from the insurance covers telehealth, it covers mindfulness programs, assuming it does, and stuff like that. Because I guess if you don't ask, the employee should ask the person interviewing, but if they don't ask, they may not know it.
So we all got to be a little bit accountable for ourselves and even be creative to sort of do some research and to know what we can ask and what we might. And it really comes to what's going on in your own world with your own family and how this whole just world in general, not just COVID, is impacting you to then consider, well, what is it that I want from my employer to make it attractive me to either work there, to investigate it through an interview or retain my employment there, Yeah. Well, those were my main 4 questions, and I've got some good ideas to be creative when I leave here today. I want to hear from you all. What else do you want to know? Throw your question in the chat box and we will cover it. I've got one question. Here we go. This goes back to a little bit of the, I guess, how you handle someone who has COVID or just the COVID vaccinations, etc. This question is on face covering in the office. Are there federal laws around this that the company has to mandate the mask wearing? Is it federal, is it state, or is it by company to company? And I'll leave that to either you or Russell or Mike.
Yeah, I can jump in first. There is no federal, uniform federal. You got to wear a mask everywhere. In any workplace type rule at the federal level. There may be industry specific rules. There are certainly local rules. That's where I think most of them are coming from at this point. City, county level mask mandates. But there's nothing that, uniformly, you can't leave your house without wearing a mask, or you can't go into any workplace without wearing a mask. The federal government does, by and large, and I see this more being down here closer to the seat of our federal government, they tend to have mask mandates for their facilities. So if you're a government contractor and your employees and you don't have a mask mandate because you don't have to, but you're going on site somewhere and that site requires masking or vaccination or testing or what have you, the site can certainly regulate how access to the site however they would like, which then creates kind of trickle down challenges for employers that want to send their workers to those sites.
Interesting.
Yeah, you're seeing it at the state level. Like New Jersey does not require it anymore. New Jersey's executive order has actually prohibited municipalities and counties from doing something contrary to what the state standard was, because early on, if anyone was from Bergen County, you remember the head guy tried to shut down the county before anything else shut down. So I think that was a lesson for New Jersey to make sure, let's try to get control of this at the state level rather than having, the local officials having things go town to town. But yeah, I mean, I personally, I don't wear a mask when I go places, but I always have one with me because a business can require it. You know, and I'm certainly not gonna, you know, if business requiring, I'll wear a mask. So, you know, I have I have mine around.
Right.
But I
Yeah,
also
I guess
wear-
because it's a health concern, that could be something a company, they don't need a government mandate for it. They can actually require that.
Yeah, no shirts, no shoes, no service, no masks, no service.
Right.
It's, you know, sort of probably not apples to apples, but it's certainly similar. They can require people to wear masks if they want to.
Yeah.
You know, I'm thinking of what, there's one local business in my town. It's a children's bookstore. Since kids still have to wear masks in school, they're still requiring that all their customers wear masks in the store because they felt that, you know, the parents and the kids would feel more comfortable that way. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, they're entirely allowed to do that.
Yeah.
A lot of people say wear them if you want, wear them if you don't. I see a lot of those signs. But then New York has required masks statewide.
I often see postings on the front door of a business that says mask required for people to come in, for, you know, customers. Yet when I go in the store, I see some not the employees, but some shoppers without masks. So it's also up to them to then to enforce it. So, and that'll determine whether I want to shop there anymore if I'm not feeling safe. And
that also comes back to Russell talking about accommodations. You have to provide accommodations if someone has you'd be discriminating against some religious beliefs and some disabilities if you didn't let anybody in who didn't have a mask. So, yeah, and then it gets tricky for a business, I think, to ask its patrons to provide, you know, verification. In fact, in New Jersey, when New Jersey required masks, you know, there was exceptions, and businesses were not allowed to ask their patrons, you know, why they weren't wearing a mask.
yeah,
So,
interesting.
yeah.
What I see a lot of is, you know, business just following the local mandate, and whether it's for employees or for customers. You know, if the local county says everyone's got to be masked, then that's the rule, and we'll put up a sign, and it will say on the sign, masks are required per, you know, local order or whatever. You're just going to shift the blame to somebody else. So anyone who wants to complain about it can call the county executive instead of the business owner.
Right.
And you know, and that's how I think it's really evolved at this point. It's going to be. I don't think private businesses are mandating masks unless, in most circumstances, children's bookstore being you know, a unique exception. But for the most part, that's going to be done at the local government, state government level.
Got it. So another question from our attendees here: are we allowed to ask about vaccination status during the recruitment period for a non-government and a private organization? So they're not an employee yet. They're just in the interview process. Are you allowed? I don't know if it's probably a yes or no question. Are they allowed to ask, are you vaccinated during the recruitment process?
You've got two lawyers on this call. There's no such thing as a yes or no question. And the answer to yes or no questions is always, it depends. I'll tell you, the advice I give clients on this is, you know, asking about vaccination status. Vaccination status alone is not a protected class. You can hire or fire someone based on that. But as we covered, there are protected classifications that could be unearthed. So just like, you know, if Carla's doing recruiting and interviewing people, she's not asking them about their age. She's not asking them about their, you know, their race, religion, ethnicity, national origin, all the litany of protected classes, because you just don't want to get that information. Because if you don't hire someone, and they say, well, I told this prospective employer that I was unvaccinated, and then they asked why, then I told them because I believe this religion, and then I didn't get hired. It must be because I believe this religion. And it becomes, you know, evidence that can be used against an employer for, to say, you know, well, you discriminated against me. So what I've been advising clients is share your policy. At some point, not at the initial stage, but at some point, and the policy is going to have exemptions in it because the policy is going to be consistent with the law. And then at some point you can say, you know, look, here's our policy. Can you comply with this policy? Not are you vaccinated, but can you comply? And then if you end up hiring them, then you go through the process of, okay, please submit your proof of vaccination, or please, you know, fill out the exemption request. And conceivably, it's possible you've wasted time as an employer with someone who falls in, you know, is due an exemption, but you can't come to an accommodation, whatever it might be. Like you could have some time waste in there. But I think that's the best process because you really just don't want to get into people's religion or disabilities in the hiring process.
Yeah,
And
I
speaking of the
agree.
vaccination, just got another, give me one second, Mike. Another question sort of around the vaccinations. One of our guests asked, can an employer require that you get a booster? So let's say you're already vaccinated, you follow that rule. Can they require you to get to the booster if the state or the government hasn't mandated?
If you can require the vaccination, I don't see why you can't require the booster.
Well, another question is kind of on that. They're asking, are employers opening themselves to liability by enforcing vaccination and booster?
Well, enforcing, no. If the law, like if you're in New York City and your employees are required to get vaccinated, there's nothing. Now, if you're voluntarily doing what I always tell my clients is at least look at the CDC website when you're going to make the decision for vaccination. Just don't go and say we're going to vaccinate because so-and-so on CNN says everybody should be vaccinated, or say we shouldn't get vaccinated because so-and-so on Fox News is anti-vax. Like, don't make it guided by the talking heads, because, one thing you're pretty guaranteed as an employer, you're going to get sued sometime. Either you're not going to get everyone vaccinated, someone's going to get COVID and sue you. There are some very serious outliers, and they're very rare, but there's some very serious cases of people who have adverse effects to the vaccine. So at least if you're getting sued, you want to be able to say, look, we looked at it and made a decision that this was best for our business because of X. Not just that, oh, well, I saw it on the news, so I went along. You'd probably be all right, but I'd rather my client at a deposition at least have a reason rather than, oh, well, somebody else said I should get vaccinated. At least I did something myself to make that assessment.
Interesting. So we got this other question coming in. I would imagine for New York City employers, that we can inform applicants in the application process that qualified applicants for this position must be fully vaccinated or willing to get vaccinated unless they have an exemption. Can they go that route?
Well, yeah, that's sort of what Russell was saying, telling them what the policy is. But what I've heard from my New York clients or New York City clients is that anybody who's not vaccinated is disclosing that in the interview process, because they know it's going to be a requirement. They just know it's going to be a requirement. I just recently had one. The guy, he qualified for religious exemption, but he let them know up front that, he wasn't vaccinated. His prior employer, he did receive a religious exemption, and they just, they proceeded with hiring him and then having him apply for the religious exemption. So you may not have to, given particularly in New York City, how well known it is that everyone has to be vaccinated. I mean, you need to be vaccinated to go into a restaurant, or most public places in New York City. So, the few who aren't vaccinated are rare. The ones who are not are usually pretty forthcoming, about it, going into an interview at least.
Why don't we pivot to this final question that we've got from one of our guests here, and this kind of want to throw it to all of you because you'll have your own opinion and what you're seeing. So the question is, what is the biggest struggle that our employers are facing right now? Now, obviously, there's many, but if each one of you want to give your 2 cents in on what you're seeing, the biggest struggle for employers today. Maybe it's COVID or not COVID.
Well, mine is definitely COVID. I have technicians not reporting that they tested positive, but they will tell each other. Then that person that finds out from who tested positive will call me and be like, hey, Carla, did you know so person tested positive? Or the technicians will test and not quarantine, just come to work without getting the test result back. And we find out a couple days later, like, hey, I took the test on Monday. I tested positive on Wednesday, but I'm still here at work. What do I do? And I'm like, what are you doing? So that's definitely the biggest issue. No one's reporting accurate information or right away for me.
Interesting. Russell, what are you seeing?
Yeah, well, I would say in general, the Great Resignation, that's the biggest challenge, is keeping employees, hiring, retaining employees. But I think that's connected. Obviously, I don't think we would be dealing with it if it weren't for COVID. And, and all the nuances that that leads to. I mean, in office settings, there's remote work and there's disengagement and lack of connection and certainly people looking at other jobs, and then there's inflation in the market. So, there's higher salaries, there's also higher prices. So people need to, look for better paying jobs. So I mean, all these things can kind of be tied together as pandemic consequences, I think. But recruiting and retention strikes me as the thing that I'm getting the most questions about, right alongside COVID compliance, because like Carla said, we can write totally compliant policies. Carla can enforce a totally compliant policy, and if someone just shows up, coughing and sneezing, and ignoring the policy that says if you're symptomatic, stay home, or tasked or whatever, there's only so much we can do at that point.
Yeah, heavy challenges. And Mike, your 2 cents on that?
Similar experience. The biggest complaint I hear is hiring people, finding people, qualified people to hire. The biggest question I still get is, so-and-so tested positive for COVID. What do we have to do? Now they've been through it for 2 years, but the CDC keeps changing the rules. It used to be 14 days you have to quarantine, then you have to quarantine for 10 days. Then if you were fully vaccinated, you didn't have to quarantine at all. Now, if you're fully vaccinated but not boosted, you have to quarantine. If you're boosted, so like the rules keep changing. So that question still keeps coming up, not because employers don't know what to do, but they don't know what the current rule, the recommendation is on it. And it's, even I have to look almost every time just in case they change the rule like the day before, and I didn't notice it because it really has changed so frequently.
So the question is, what's keeping the employers really challenged is keeping you all challenged too.
Yeah.
So in our last 2 minutes, just want to ask this final question from an audience member. Must the employer provide exemption forms, or is that the responsibility of the employee? Any of you got a thought on that?
I haven't done that. I think we dealt with one case where we provided the form for them.
Yeah, I think when it comes to compliance with like the anti-discrimination laws, that the employer ultimately is going to be responsible for being in compliance. That burden isn't going to shift to an employee. And so I don't think there's a specific rule that says you have to provide these forms and they have to look this way, but clearly a best practice for an employer to do so.
Yeah. Well, we could probably talk about this for quite a few hours, but we just hit our hour mark. So listen, before we go, I just want to really thank our guest speakers here, Mike, Carla, Russell, for your time, your energy, insights. And I know it's continuing to evolve, but you've given us more to think about, some ideas of what we can do from here. I have a clear idea what's going to be useful. Hopefully you all walked away with a little bit more in the know of what you can do. I also want to thank you, our audience, for your participation. I mean, you just give me and us just reason for being here. And secondly, I just want to keep an eye out for, why isn't that moving? Keep an eye out for future webinar invites. I'm working on my plans for the next quarter. So keep an eye out I might even send a poll to you to get an idea of what topics you want. So we'll get an invite to you for our next webinar. And then lastly, our conversation does not have to end here. You can connect with Russell, Mike, and Carla for more information. You can come out to me for more information. You can subscribe to the Careers Advance YouTube channel if you want to review past programs. Reach out for questions, share your ideas and progress. Just keep in touch. When we work together, everyone's mission is possible. Thank you all. Stay safe. Keep rocking it out this year. See you next time.